Another big hello and welcome to all our listeners in what is now Series 1, Episode 2 of Ashaluk, It's Irish History. I'm Niall Salmon and I'm joined again by my two partners in crime, Mr. Kieran Dowdall.
How you doing?
And Mr. Stephen Fraser.
Well, good to be back again.
Lads, Happy New Year to you. Did Santa bring you anything nice for Christmas, Kieran?
I got a banjo and, as is customary in my family, a lot of bottles of bills.
Oh, lovely, a banjo.
Very nice, yeah. My wife doesn't let me play around that, though, because she hates the sound of it.
Probably a bit of a deliverance vibe going on there, Kieran, maybe.
That's all I've learned so far. Just gonna stay outside the house and start playing as people walk by. Ding, 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 ding.
Oh, stop. How about yourself, Theo?
I got a violin. I tried to tune it on the first day and I didn't know what I was doing. I broke the string, so I had to go back to the drawing board. I'm going to get lessons. How about yourself? Oh, yeah. A bit of...
real lads.
We're going to get a bit of a Kaylee going, I reckon.
Jesus, all the proper music vibes. You're making me jealous. I should have probably got a bower on or something. We'll have ourselves a little trad session or something at some stage.
You could have my bower on. It's been sitting on that shelf for the last 10 years or so.
Boom. Yeah. Right then, the Slow Rollers trad edition it is.
Yeah.
We'll get it going soon. Well, I got a United jersey with my favourite new player, Casemiro, on the back, so I'm very pleased about that. And United are flying high at the minute, so long may it last. We'll see how long it lasts.
Not myself.
But yeah, listen.
On jersey as well.
Well, that's it. After all the positive feedback we received from our first episode in November, folks, we decided to press ahead with episode 2. And the focus on today's podcast is, as you expect, Irish life in the 1930s. So in the first episode in November, we spoke about what Irish life is like in the 1920s from the perspective of the 3 S's: social life, sporting life, and scandal. It's essentially going to be the same format again for today. Kieran's going to be covering all aspects of social political life in the 1930s. I'm also keen to talk again about Irish sporting successes in the 1930s, including the Irish soccer team's battles on the pitch with Nazi Germany. I'm also going to cover some key moments from the 1932 Olympics in Los Angeles, which, in my opinion, was undoubtedly one of the biggest and best moments as a newly formed state that we had on the international sporting stage. What's that?
Well, what year was that in Los Angeles?
That was 1932, Theo. So we were only a nation about 10 years, and I've got some really interesting stories from that Olympics that you'll be pleasantly surprised to hear about.
Yeah, last ones were very interesting.
The one a couple of years ago.
One of the last episode, there was some fascinating stuff.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was the one in Paris. And then before handing the reins over to yourself, Steele, I'll briefly cover the fact that we actually didn't compete in the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin, the reasons why. And I'll talk very briefly about Ireland's performance in the 1935 Nations Championship. And then Steele, as he did the last time, he's going to finish up with a very interesting piece related to a fascinating story that gripped the country in the early 1930s. So that's pretty much the format we have for today. Looking forward to getting started now in a few minutes. But before we do that, I think it's important to call out one or two moments from the first episode. So hands up from myself, Noel, because I have to apologise. It was a slip of the tongue. I incorrectly mentioned the date of 1929 as the year that Ireland achieved the Republic. As most of us know, it was indeed 1949 when the Republic was finally achieved. We're going to cover this in detail in episode 3 when it comes to talking about Irish life in the 1940s, because it was, of course, one of the most important moments in modern Irish history. And I also have to give a shout out to our podcast mascot, Ripley the cat. I've no doubt our listeners heard Ripley making a guest appearance on the mics in episode 1 in November. So
I'm here to provide the effects for this episode.
What's it?
I'm here to provide the sound effects for this episode.
Well, she may well pop in again to say hello if Theo doesn't get there first. But I think that covers everything in terms of the intro. Just before we kick things off, Kieran, I think we've had some positive feedback about episode 1. It was our first episode. As Theo said, we were a little bit rusty. We're only getting to grips with it. So I think this one will be a little bit more smoother. What do you reckon?
Oh, definitely, yeah. Well, it was kind of like the last time I was kind of crapping myself too on my part. And yeah, now I've kind of listened back to myself and gone, I actually didn't sound that bad. I kind of, more comfortable. But, Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's like what I really learned is like listening is really a skill. Like it was the first one I was very worried about my part, and I wouldn't say I wasn't listening, but
Yeah.
then, like listening back to both your bits, I was like, geez, that's actually really interesting. It's because I was probably in the moment, oh God, we're live, etc., blah, blah, blah. But when you listen back, it's like, oh yeah, that's actually really good.
It's a really good point. It reminds me of when I'm doing a meeting in work and you know that your piece is coming up soon. You're so distracted by your own piece that you nearly tune out of what other people are saying. But look, we're going to make it much more conversational this time. And I think on that note, Kieran, you've been doing some research on what Irish social and political life was like in the 1930s.
Yeah, so really, look, the biggest thing in the 1930s was the Great Depression. I mean, in Ireland for years after, it was called the Hungry 30s, you know? So, like, as everybody knows, the Great Depression was a worldwide economic downturn that began in 1929 and lasted until 1939, so around the outbreak of the Second World War. It's been the longest, most severe depression ever experienced by the Western world. It completely changed the economic life, macroeconomic policies, economic theories for governments. It originated in the United States. It caused a huge decline in output, severe unemployment, acute deflation in every country of the world, and Ireland was really no exception. So social and cultural effects were no less staggering. The Cumann Gael government, it was the government at the time, at the start of it, they were economically favoured towards kind of balanced budgets and free trade. On the other hand, you would have had Fianna Fail. They will advocate like a form of protectionism. So after the aftermath of the Civil War, the economy of the Free State was really weak, and it was bound to suffer, you know. And there was a lot of Ireland wasn't a very rich country. There was poverty anyway, but it became worse, much more pronounced. Unfortunately, for a lot of the people at that time, you know, they had that austerity mentality, and they handed it down to their kids. You know, these people they've been living hand to mouth, became even worse. And, you know, it's kind of a forgotten part of Irish history. People think of the famine of that deprivation time, but it would have been as well.
That was only like a grandparent away. That's no time at all. Like from 1930 to 1850 was the famine.
1845, 51. Yeah,
I mean, exactly. That's literally only an 80-year-old away. That's fresh in the psyche of any family.
Yeah, well, like my grandparents would have been alive during that time. Now, with small children, so they don't remember, but like they will have obviously experienced it. You know, if you're 3-4 years old, it's kind of, you know, hard to have those recollections. But their parents,
they would have absolutely experienced it. My grandmother, I think, was born in 1912.
Ooh,
you know, so she would have been in her almost in her 20s. By the time the Great Depression hit, you know. So
and like what we were saying, Kieran, you think like the government was like ill-equipped to handle.
Every government was.
Yeah. I suppose there was famines, like I think as well as Ireland. I mean, wasn't there like really like horrible famines in Sweden in the 1800s as well?
Oh yeah. Well, there wouldn't have, like there was famines in the 30s. There was famines in the USSR, but those were kind of man-made by Stalin. But this would have been more not so much famine as just deprivation. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Loss of jobs. You know, the social welfare system was almost non-existent. You know, so there would have been.
And then emigration would have been still front and center as well.
Yeah. But I have the thing is, at the time, there was this kind of running battle between Cumann Gael, which, as we said in the last episode, became Fine Gael, and Fianna Fail. So, like, there was an election coming up in around the 30s, 1932. And so Cumann na Gael, they were basically running on the premise that they had provided 10 years of honest government and they brought political and economic stability, which for the vast majority of people, they hadn't done it. Fianna Fail were the other ones. They were they had a more kind of socialist outlook at the time. But there was a battle going on. Cumann na Gael were basically saying, if you vote for Fianna Fail, that's socialism, that's communism, And they kind of called a snap election thinking they were gonna win, and they ended up losing,
This is 1932?
Yeah, 1932. And like, so this was in February.
10 years after the foundation of the Irish Free State.
Yeah, so they won 57 seats to Fianna Fail 72, and like, they were in shock at this. They were ultimately in shock, but they weren't sure. So here's the thing, like, Fianna Fail and most people weren't sure if power will be handed over peacefully. So you'll hear this. There's lots of stories of the TDs showing up for the handover of the Dáil with guns in their pockets, expecting there to be a gunfight. Imagine in the Dáil, like, And some of the army weren't sure, but Cumann na Gael, to their credit, instructed the police, the army, to hand over peacefully. Most of the generals said, look, well, we served them, we'll serve you. And the power transition was pretty seamless. It was actually a bit of a storm in a teacup, People were terrified, and they all went home and had their tea.
It's interesting because it's only 10 years since the Civil War. I'd say the hatred was still palpable across both sides.
Yeah.
So most of the
I think the gun was still very much alive in Irish politics.
Yeah, most of the rhetoric going between them was, they'd be saying, you sold out to, the Cumann na Gael guys, you sold out to Republic, and the Fianna Failers would be getting, you are murderers, and, you broke the Republic, or you broke the IRA up, and that was a lot of mudslinging. But this is one of the things that comes of it. So, the 9th of March, 1932, De Valera becomes president of the Executive Council of the Free State, basically the Taoiseach. Pretty much he'd hold that for the next 16 years uninterrupted. So first things first, he lifts the ban on the IRA. So they've been banned, at the time of the Civil War and since. He then took advantage of Edward VIII abdicating in Britain to enact the Executive Authority External Relations Act of 1936 and the Executive Powers Consequential Provisions Act of 1937. This basically had the effect of ending the role of the Governor General of the Free State. Yeah. So this changed from him having control of Irish internal affairs to the government, and then what became the office of the president. Yeah,
you're talking about the lead up to Bunrock na HÉireann, the Irish Constitution in 1947.
Exactly. So this was the first step in it. They were smart. They noticed this abdication crisis, and they were like, "Well, this is actually the perfect time." They're not concerned with us anymore. They've bigger fish to fry. And they were able to get this through, and that's what led them. That was that move. Yeah, that was that first step. Like, good man, Edward VIII and Wallace Simpson. The unspoken heroes of Irish republicanism.
Never thought of that before. The movie, The King's Speech.
Yeah.
It's good movie. Won a couple of Oscars, I think. I think it was Colin Firth who played King George VI. He was famous for having the stammer, and I can't remember. I think it was the Guy Pearce, I think is the actor's name.
Yeah.
I think he played the king who abdicated, and it's all depicted in that. For any listeners out there who haven't seen the movie, The King's Speech, it's well worth a watch.
Well, sorry, just for a dummy like me. So, the Governor General, is that correct? Was De Valera got rid of that, and what you're saying is he had a certain power over Ireland. Is that correct?
He would have been essentially the king's representative in Ireland.
Yeah.
Right. And right. And and De Valera saw this as an opportunity to remove this pillar of
they had
colonialism.
But they've been kind of they've been doing this for a couple of years in the 20s and the 30s, where if the Governor General, the guy called Tim Healy, if he came to a party, like they did pretty much kind of ostracize him. They got into the 30s where, like, government ministers, especially Fianna Fail government ministers, would leave a party or a state function that he would go to, they basically pretty much just kind of said, oh, look, you're over there. We don't really care about you. And that's the first thing they did was, to get rid of that. And they actually appointed somebody who was willing to, go along with it to abolish that office, But like one of the things that kind of kicked off absolutely. With... Go on, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, back to Steele's question, just very briefly, I mean, the countries that still have dominion status within the British Empire, the likes of Canada, the likes of Australia, the likes of New Zealand, they would all still have a Governor General in place of some kind.
Oh, yeah.
Again, to act as the monarchy's representative in those different dominions. But of course, the reason it was such a big deal for Ireland implementing that 1937 constitution, it was effectively becoming a republic in all but name.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. I remember that. Yeah. Excellent.
But sorry, Kieran, continue.
But that was always the objective, really, wasn't it? Even though Fine Gael and Fine Gael, Cumann Gael and Fianna Fáil, they all had that one purpose, despite their differences. I think any government that got in there was going to systematically dismantle, bit by bit, kind of like the frog in the boiling water. Do it kind of without them noticing. Wait for the British to get distracted and go, we'll just pass this. And they go, it's not that important. Yeah. Okay.
You're right in what you're saying, though, about they all had the same agenda, because it goes back to what Collins originally said, the freedom to achieve freedom.
Exactly.
And you can criticise De Valera a lot for a lot of decisions he's made in the history in the history of our country, but at least that was one of the good things he did,
Absolutely. Well, I'm sorry to go off on a slight tangent and sorry to hog your bit, Kieran. I watched, and I'll do this very quickly, Michael Collins, when I watched it there the other night, Steph obviously wants to watch it all the time. I'm like, I've seen it so many times, I can nearly recite the whole thing. But I actually thought that I was only saying this to Kieran last weekend, that I actually, for the first time, seen the Customs House attack as very, very important to the British at that time folding, because they needed that international struggle for the international press and the Americans to go, here, look what you're doing to the Irish. They clearly want freedom. They needed that big stage battle. And
large scale engagements.
Yeah. So if you're on a tangent there, but it's just like, I think De Valera does get a bad rap, in my opinion. But for me, that was the right chess move at the time. Now, Collins was doing a lot of the, he was killing high profile, and he was doing a lot. It was a two-pronged strategy that worked so well. But I think the Customs House thing was absolutely essential. Sorry, that's me hogging my line. Sorry.
No, it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Very interesting. Yeah, I suppose we are right, though, because we should keep on point in the 1930s, not the 1920s. But it's all good. It's an interesting topic nonetheless. Yeah.
But with De Valera, first things first, he still he hadn't forgiven the British anyway, so he started the Anglo-Irish trade war. He started weakening any links between the Free State and Britain, and at the time, Britain was still our biggest trading partner, by far. He started withholding these land annuity payments. Basically, the old landlords had gotten rid of their land; they couldn't keep it in Ireland, so the government bought them and to give it out. But they stopped paying those payments to the British. But the good old Irish government, they kept charging the farmers. It was about 4 million they'd make off it annually. So they placed high tariffs on British imports. The British responded with placing the tariffs on Irish goods, especially the agricultural produce. That was our biggest output at the time. And it became a tit-for-tat policy. It was in the middle of the Great Depression. This is absolutely disastrous for the economy. It's already bad, and farm labourers, there was huge unemployment, poverty again was rampant. And the Irish government really promoted the war, though. They had a remarkable slogan. It was done by Jonathan Swift in the 1720s. Burn everything English except our coal. And the government kind of urged people to like support the confrontation with Britain as a national hardship to be shared by every citizen. And you guarantee they weren't living in any sort of hardship. And it pretty much lasted until 1938 when the Anglo-Irish Free Trade Agreement was signed and relations kind of normalised. And so then the other thing, as we said earlier, De Valera legalised the IRA again. It had been banned. So at the start, when the Fianna Fail government were elected in 1932, membership was about 1,800, grew to 10,000 within a matter of months.
Whoa.
And yeah, but this was down to like the radicalizing impact of the Great Depression on people, like, and you know, the IRA had really accepted like the social radicalism that kind of became one of its tenets, still is, you know, up until, you know, the left, you know, Sinn Féin are left wing now, you know what I mean? It's, you know, they've always had that kind of thing. But another important factor was the formation of the Blueshirts, you know, to protect Cumann Gael meetings.
Mr. Owen O'Duffy.
Yeah, and to be honest, we're going to do a whole episode just on that. It's a huge story, but like, they're basically Civil War veterans, and they'd set up a quasi-fascist kind of organisation to protect meetings from the IRA. So the IRA and the Blueshirts, they'd attack each other's political meetings. It was street brawls. Look, most of it was conducted like with fists and boots, as, you know, was the style at the time. But at least one Blueshirt and one IRA man were shot dead in the clashes. And the IRA leaders kind of saw these events as the beginning of another Republican revolution and the overthrow of the Free State. But they were to be disappointed. Like De Valera, he was initially friendly towards the IRA, legalising organisations, as I said, freeing political prisoners that had been interned by Cumann Gael. And he kind of afforded the IRA a sort of quasi-legal status. The meant the Garda were even afraid to kind of go near them because they figured there'd be repercussions. Like, he snubbed the Garda. So this is one of the craziest things, right? He snubbed the Guard of Honour on his election in Skibbereen, but saluted the IRA one. And that's mad, you know, for a sitting Taoiseach, you know, to take a salute off, as it says, like a quasi-political organisation. But by 1935, like, the relationship was starting to sour on both sides. The IRA kind of accused Dev and Fianna Fail of selling out by not declaring the Republic and kind of tolerating the partition of Ireland. So Dev banned the IRA again in 1936 after they murdered a landlord's agent, a guy called Richard Moore O'Farrell, in a land dispute. And there was a couple of other things, like they fired shots at the police during a strike of the Dublin Tramways worker, and as in good old Republican fashion, they were doing a lot of bank robberies as well.
Nice. Busy boys at the time, huh?
Yeah, but like, here's the gas thing. Like, so one of the big things, like, a lot of the Republicans, like, even after the banning, they became reconciled with the Free State. Because De Valera's government, like, they introduced like the proper Republican constitution in 1936. They abolished the oath of allegiance to the monarchy.
That was a big one.
Yeah, elected the president, you know.
Yeah, the oath of allegiance is what, in some cases, caused a hell of a lot of bother. You could even say it was one of the main catalysts of the Civil War. It
was the North. This is one of the things. The North wasn't the biggest thing. It was the oath was the biggest thing.
Yeah.
But that's it. They got rid of that. And the other thing they did in that constitution, they included the territorial claim to Northern Ireland. You know, as is said in that, it claims the whole of Ireland, you know? And like, after that, like, in kind of in the very late 30s, like, most Irish people started to disagree with the IRA's kind of claim that they're the legitimate army of the Republic. And they were like going, you know, the Republic was within a grasp, or more of a grasp than it had ever been, really, you know, and it's an overlooked part. But the last thing I'm going to go into is what was the biggest event in Ireland, probably in 100 years, the Eucharistic Congress. Now, I'm a
Catholic Church.
Yeah, we've made a few changes. Now, I'm a Catholic now, albeit not a very good Catholic.
A lapsed Catholic.
A lapsed Catholic, yeah. So,
aren't we all, Kieran, in this crazy modern world?
Forgive me if some of this is a little tongue-in-cheek as I go through it. So, it's basically this.
Just to mention, I am getting married in August, so I better be careful as any priest listening to this.
Sorry, Father. So the 31st International Eucharistic Congress, this was held in Dublin the 22nd to the 26th of June 1932, and it was one of the largest Eucharistic congresses of the 20th century. Ireland at the time was home to about 3 million Catholics. So it was selected to host the Congress in 1932 because that was the 1500th anniversary of the arrival of St. Patrick, so they say. The theme was the propagation of the sainted Eucharist by the Irish missionaries. But like, so here's the crazy thing, like, Dublin went into a religious fever, like, so they decorated the whole streets. There's pictures, I tell you,
Vatican flags everywhere.
Everywhere. Yeah. So banners, bunting, garlands. They built a replica round tower in Dame Street, like, it's amazing, like. And they were expecting like millions of tourists, and it's a huge thing. So they had like big ocean liners floating out in the port around Sir John Rogers's Quay. And it acted as hotels to accommodate maybe 130 to 1,500 people on some of them. They formed the Blue Hussars, it's a ceremonial cavalry unit of the Irish Army. It's used to escort the President of Ireland on state occasions, but it first appeared in public as the honour guard for the visiting papal legate representing Pope Pius XI. So Dublin, in the run-up to the Congress, amid spectacular lighting display. So this is, let me get this pronunciation right. Adoramus Laudamus Glorificamus was beamed into the night sky in gigantic letters, like.
Really?
Yeah. And again,
like the bat signal.
Yeah. And this again, they didn't have. This was like a time of the Great Depression, and you know, they all stops were pulled out. You know,
wow.
Like, yeah, for Catholics, this was like, you know,
Woodstock.
Yeah, this was amazing.
Killer boots, man.
Yeah, it's like the Rolling Stones coming to town or something, you know. All the roadies, like the Golden Cleric Awards.
The Golden Cleric. And now on to Liars.
That's episode 3, Niall. Low scores. But like, so yeah, they were beaming letters in. So midnight mass was being celebrated, and all churches on the open night. So there was like that many people were trying to get in. Like the churches couldn't accommodate everybody. Like, you know, churches on Christmas, you know. Like, you know, it's the only time
going out the door, basically.
Yeah.
People's like, it's outlet, their social outlet in a lot of ways.
Well, like, so this was even a like everybody would have firmly been religious, you know. But like, that's one of the things, right? The sheer number of people who participated in this, like, Eucharistic Congress, it's mad. So the men's mass, okay, so it was held in the 15 acres in the Phoenix Park on the 23rd of June, in front of this like huge altar, columns, and it was attended by about 250,000 people. The women's mass took place on the 24th. It's about 200,000 people. There was a children's mass on the 25th with 100,000 people, and we'll say less about that one. And the main political pontifical high mass on the 26th of June was estimated to have about 1 million people. So it's amazing. Like, so the highlight for them was the high mass in the Phoenix Park featured a live broadcast from Pope Pius XI from the Vatican, which is pretty impressive for the time, you know? Yeah, like the broadcast.
How would they have even done that without satellites? That's mental.
Yeah, like I suppose like they would have had to relay the signal from different points, I suppose, kind of.
Oh, yeah, I suppose it's probably like when the king talks to all the Commonwealth using wireless or something like that.
But that's
the equivalent of that at the time.
This was it. Like, it was actually kind of cutting edge. Like, you know, all joking aside, like like, so they put a PA system all over the city, like loudspeakers in the park, along the quays, loads of different locations to blare this mass out over these days. Like, you know, for anyone who couldn't make it, like, and you know, this was actually it was probably one of the most extensive PA systems that ever been arranged in the world at the time. Like, and it's crazy. Like I said, at a time of such kind of poverty, the
hardship,
out, you know, all the stops, but like it made Dublin kind of like a virtual open air cathedral. Like, you know, really, probably would, if you were religious, it would have been amazing with all the bunting and the banners and everything and the mass playing. Some people would have liked it.
Italianity of the time.
Yeah, stop, yeah. Pope busters. Well, so one of the big things was there was a guy called Count John McCormick. He was an opera singer, a tenor, and he ended up singing Panis Angelicus to the audience. So he was a hugely popular Irish singer. So for a lot of people, they would have loved this, and but I'm sure a good few people went just to see him.
Give us a bar.
Of John McCormick, no, I have a voice like a goose farting in the fog. Definitely cannot sing opera. but like, so this is one of the things. So there was a huge kind of amount of planning and people, volunteers that had to go into getting this to where it was. So like it was organised with great precision as well. So it was about 20,000 stewards, again, all voluntary, 4,000 Catholic Boy Scouts, all in, given detailed instructions, what they have to do, what was needed. And like, that's huge amount. And so all the parishes of Dublin, all the dioceses of Ireland, overseas pilgrims, they're all given their own special position in the park facing the altar. Large catering tents had to be erected, information bureaus, first aid stations, toilets. They even brought in like a special water supply to the park for the occasion. All this stuff had to be staffed, It's a huge thing, like, and all voluntary. So after, there was an interval for half an hour for the refreshments, and the mass the procession, basically, they made their way from the Phoenix Park right through the city centre. And again, there was 1 million people.
Yep.
So the logistical achievement, this is extraordinary, moving down the city quays, like thousands, apparently divided carefully into sections around Capel Street, Parliament Street, and eventually all came together on both sides around O'Connell Bridge, where they built an altar in the middle of the bridge for the service of benediction that apparently traditionally marks the culmination of the Eucharistic Congress. On the occasion, the benediction of the Blessed Sacrament was given by the visiting papal legate, who was the major guest. He was the star, Cardinal Lorenzo Lori, and he'd been like vocal point of displayed devotion since he showed up in Ireland, and it was like huge scenes of pomp and exuberance, and it's just crazy because I live in Dublin City, so like when Pope Francis came to town, like the place was empty. Like he was just passing maybe one or two people, and the whole city blocked off, and there was just nothing like where like our parents remember, like, when Pope John Paul II came in the 70s. Huge.
Yeah. Again, there was 1 million people in the Phoenix Park that time as well. It just goes to show you, in the space of 40 odd years, like the less of a stronghold the Catholic Church actually has on the country, and it's crazy how times have changed in such a short lifetime.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of the things, like, as I looked at photos of it and read about it, like, and people, it was the highlight of their lives for some of them, you know what I mean? They were just like a representative of the church has come here, and it's just, it's different times, but I found that kind of, like I said, when the Pope came, I kind of was like, there he is. Oh, well, I'll head home and get me dinner.
That's it.
It's still a big deal, but Steph's mom and dad, they had wouldn't say their couple of first dates, but that's where Steph's dad met his mother-in-law. An event to go to the John Paul one, obviously, but
bag of cans,
you know it.
Bag of cans with the Pope.
Very good. As was the style at the time, Kieran, to your point earlier on. But no, really, really interesting, Kieran. I think it's all very relevant as well in terms of, the trade war. Look at what's happening at the moment with Brexit. I mean, it's very similar circumstances. And then the Eucharistic Congress, as you already mentioned, the Pope's visit in 2018, nowhere near the same type of event, but in terms of Catholicism, that they'd be on a par, So, no, really, really interesting stuff. Any comments on Kieran's section, Theo, before we move on?
No.
Any comments on Kieran? No,
I enjoyed it.
Well, thank you very much.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
So, what have you been doing?
Well, look, I think
I definitely listened better. Like I was closing my eyes, listening, and taking it all in as we get used to being live, and I definitely took it all in more. Fascinating that as we go through, I think the big thing for me, I think as you get older, I'm not saying that we're all in our 30s, but you start to realize, don't you, that 10 years is really nothing. And when you think back 10 years, we're now in 2022. 10 years ago was 2012.
Well, 2023 still.
Oh, sorry, geez.
I always do that as well for about the 4-6 months of the year.
To be fair, we're only 13 days in, so
yeah. Like 2013 for me is it's still relevant, it's still hip, it's still up to date. 2013, I'm like, well, and then you realize as you get older, and it's an unfortunate thing of getting older, like the years become shorter, and when you kind of like learning all this stuff in school, when you like hear of when you raise the point of like the Cumann na Gael government or the Fianna Fail government come to take charge in 1932 with their guns in their pockets, because 10 years to them, like these would be people in their early 40s at that stage, because they would have been in their 30s fighting in the War of Independence.
And younger.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
But as you said, 10 years, nothing. That would be so fresh in our mind. But for us as kids, as mentioned in the first episode, we as Irish pupils, we literally had our own, as well as the European history book we had. Well, certainly for the Leaving Cert, I did history for the Leaving Cert. We also had our own Irish history book. And when you're a kid of 18 or 17, as we were doing the Leaving, 10 years was a lifetime. Do you know what I mean? But as we do this podcast and you start to look at Irish history, you go, Jesus, when you say guns in their pockets, that was a bit extreme, but it wasn't, because 10 years is...
Yeah, it's less than 100 years ago.
Do you know what I mean?
That's what's so fascinating about it,
As mentioned, it's only a grandparent away or a great-grandparent away, which is nothing.
Absolutely. So yeah, I think that covers the social political aspect of the 1930s. Thanks, Kieran. Fascinating insights as always. And just like the last episode, I'm going to take a few minutes to talk about Irish sporting life in the 1930s. And wanted to start this segment by covering what I'm most passionate about, which, as mentioned in episode 1, is of course Irish football. So in episode 1, I spoke about the formation of the Football Association of the Irish Free State. And in 1923, the FAIFS, as they were known at the time, was accepted into FIFA, and after that became our participation in the 1924 Paris Olympics. We did compete as Ireland. So I wanted to kick off this section by talking about our first ever World Cup qualifying campaign for the 1934 World Cup, which was actually hosted in Italy. Yeah, I know. I was really interested in this one. I was doing a bit of research. The 1934 World Cup was hosted in Italy and it was eventually won by the host Italy for their first ever World Cup victory. And interestingly enough, Italy retained the trophy 4 years later in 1938 in France. But if we were to just go in reverse for a second and talk about the first ever World Cup in Uruguay in 1930, which was, of course, won by the host Uruguay, only 4 European teams competed in that first ever World Cup in Uruguay. Which is really interesting. You fast forward to 1934 and 32 teams expressed an interest in competing in that tournament in Italy, including Ireland. But in terms of the qualifying campaign, right, over here in Europe for the 1934 World Cup in Italy, I suppose that the groups were a little bit uneven, and because of political turmoil, wars, etc., there was chaos across some of the groups, some of the teams. For instance, some groups featured 3 teams, some groups featured only 2 teams. Some teams, such as Bulgaria and Turkey, they either withdrew from qualification or they just did not complete their fixtures because of various, political reasons, etc. Even the hosts, Italy, had to play a qualifying campaign. And there was one game they actually had won 4-0 at the San Siro. I was reading about it. A guy called Giuseppe Miazza scored 2 goals. They had to play Greece next in their qualification, and Greece actually declined to play the second leg, which actually secured Italy's qualification for their own hosted tournament. Again, This is back in the 1930s. International football was only in its infancy, so it was absolute chaos in terms of the qualification, based on turmoil that was happening in different nations across Europe. Wow. But to bring it back to Ireland for a second. So we were drawn in a group alongside Belgium and the Netherlands. Very simple qualification formula. play against each other once, and the group winners and runners-up qualify for the World Cup in 1934 in Italy. Now, Ireland must have been very confident going into these games at the time because they had actually played Belgium 3 times before 1934, and they won all 3 matches.
Wow.
They'd also played the Dutch in Amsterdam in 1932. Again, this is 2 years previous. That game had ended in a 2-0 victory to the Irish. So Irish football was on a high internationally. I mean, we were going away and we were putting these teams away with ease. So it was a really, really good time for Irish football. Now, in terms of the World Cup qualifying campaign, first game was against Belgium. Took place on the 25th of February 1934 in, of all places, Dalymount Park, the usual. And obviously the new competition, new qualifying format, etc., it obviously captured the imagination of the public because over 35,000 spectators crammed into Dalymount on that day. Now, what they saw that day, they may have been disappointed with the scoreline, but they were not let down by the drama on the pitch because they saw an 8-goal thriller. They also witnessed one of the greatest performances ever by an Irish player, a certain Paddy Moore. He was playing for Aberdeen at the time. He scored all 4 goals in a 4-all draw against the Belgians that day. Paddy Moore. So really interesting stuff. In terms of the football on the pitch, I think it was after an hour of play, Ireland had been trailing 4-3. 15 minutes to go, Paddy Moore pops up and grabs the equaliser. Okay? So 4-all against Belgium in our first game. Now, they may have been disappointed not to win the game, but they knew that a victory in Amsterdam against the Dutch would secure World Cup qualification. So that's what was riding on the line here, you know. Now, the Dutch FA, they weren't taking any chances in their preparation. Now, this is a little bit sneaky. So what they did was they asked the FAI for photos and fact files on their main players ahead of the game. They claimed to the FAI they were going to use this as promotional material and put it in the newspapers. Of course, they were researching the players, researching how good they were, the positions they played in, so that they were well equipped to kind of handle them when it came to match day.
Wow.
Yeah, really interesting. But look, the FAI being the FAI, they duly obliged. They sent over photos, details of their star player, Paddy Moore. He was appearing in Dutch newspapers in the lead up to the game. Unfortunately, this would come back to haunt them. But on the day of the match, which was the 8th of April, 1934, again, Ireland win this game and we're in the World Cup. We wouldn't have to wait until Italia 90. We would have been in the 1934 World Cup. But look, as per usual, there's never a good ending in Irish football stories. So in terms of the match itself, we fielded a domestic-based 11. Cork City's Jim Fox Foley was in goal on the day. He had just won the FAI Cup with Cork and he was about to make a very big transfer to Celtic. Bohemians, who had actually just been on tour in the Netherlands at the time, they had 2 players in the squad. Billy Jordan, who started the game, he was injured in the first half and he was replaced by his club teammate, Fred Horlacher, just before halftime. I had to look up Fred Horlacher to make sure there wasn't an error in names. Fred Horlacher was from Dublin. He was the son of German immigrants. But because of his substitute appearance in that game, he made history by becoming the first ever substitute used by the FAI in an international match. Fred Horlacher. Poor fella actually died of pneumonia at the age of 33 in the early 1940s, surprisingly enough. But yeah, going back to the action on the pitch. Yeah, no, really interesting stuff. Going back to the action on the pitch. Theo, you'll be happy to hear Johnny Squares of Shells.
Yes.
Had just equalised for Ireland after a guy called Kick Smith opened the scoring for the Dutch. I wonder where he got that name from. So to take stock of the situation, the start of the second half, 2 sides are level at one apiece, and Paddy Moore takes the lead. Paddy Moore, that man again, takes the lead with a controversial goal just before the hour mark. And what did he do? He pushed the Dutch keeper, Adre Van Male, over the line when the keeper had the ball in his hands. Wow. He literally just shoved him over the line with the ball in his hands. And this tactic of barging the keeper wasn't uncommon for Irish or British players in football at the time, but something the Dutch amateur team had never experienced before. They didn't know what was going on. And can you believe it? There was no VAR back then, lads. The goal was awarded.
Wow.
Much to the dismay of the record 40,000 people packed into the Olympic Stadium in Amsterdam that day. Wow. Again, Ireland were 2-1 up with 30 minutes to play. A win would have sent us to our first ever World Cup. I know it was a long time ago, but again, it's not to be taken lightly, the magnitude of this. Unfortunately, as we're so used to over the decades, for Irish football teams and fans, it wasn't to be. So, unfortunately, that controversial goal spurned a very talented Dutch team on, gave them motivation, and they scored 4 unanswered goals within 23 minutes to claim a 5-2 victory and qualify for the 1934 World Cup at our expense. We've heard this expression before: Ireland's World Cup dream was over. But even though it was very disappointing, it would have been very special if we had qualified for what would have been the very first World Cup ever hosted in Europe. And of a few more things to talk about in relation to soccer in the 1930s. But, I think from an overall perspective, the 1930s is a pretty successful decade for the national team. We bet Switzerland in 1935 1-0 in a friendly. But the most interesting matches probably of the mid to late 1930s were with Nazi Germany. And you guys and any of our listeners might have, came across articles on Joe.ie in the Irish Times of a very well-known German Nazi salute, both in Dalymount, in a game in 1936, which I'm going to talk about in a moment. But in 1939, the Irish team played the Germany in Bremen in the first game before World War II. And the Irish team actually gave the Nazi salute as well. Which absolutely incredible, But just to go into detail about our tussles with Germany during that period. So we had played Germany for the first time in 1935. We lost by a scoreline of 3-1 in Dortmund. And what happened was then we played them in a return fixture in 1936 in Dalymount. Now let's take stock of where we are at that time. The Nazis saw football as an important way of showing strength on the world stage, even though the game was still yet to be professionalised in Germany. They still didn't have a national league in place at the time. However, on the 17th of October 1936, 28,000 fans went to the game in Dalymount Park to witness what was a historic victory for the boys in green that day. And the match was memorable not only for the result, but as well as that this was played against the Germans during the height of Nazi propaganda. Ireland actually won the game by 5-2, but before the game started, the Irish crowd were bemused to see German players along with German dignitaries given the one-arm Nazi salute. And if we were to just mention to our listeners about the historical context, the political context of the time, on the 7th of March earlier that year, Germany had violated the Treaty of Versailles by reoccupying the Rhineland. And Hitler and the Nazi Party were at their most popular because they had just rebuilt the German economy out of the ruins from World War I. The rest of the Europe was, really struggling economically. Kieran, you talked about the Great Depression, whereas Germany was flourishing.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, the only place I could find where they were.
Yeah, exactly. So their economy was booming. Hitler was secretly building up his military, and of course, they wanted their footballers doing well on the international stage just to showcase German superiority. But on the football, it wasn't going too well for them because they had just played Scotland a few days previous. They had lost to the Scots 1-0 in Ibrox. And then I was reading a few excerpts online, and this was an October afternoon. The Germans made their way up O'Connell Street towards Dalymount Park. In terms of the football on the day, there was a dominant performance by Ireland, and we ran out 5-2 winners. Tom Davis of Oldham scored a brace on his debut. And the following is a piece from the Irish Times report at the time, and it reads as follows. Extraordinary scenes preceded the start and marked the close of an eventful struggle. The German team lined up in the centre of the field and faced the popular stand. They gave the Nazi salute, and turning to the grandstand in which the officials of the German Association and 400 German spectators who had come over by specially chartered liner stood rigidly to attention with right arms outstretched, while the army band under the leadership of Colonel Fritz Brass played the Nazi anthem, which was sung by the Germans in the stand. Like, it's absolutely insane. This is Dalymount Park, 1936. The Nazis at the height of their power. Straight arm salutes. Sorry?
Did you have a bar of that?
Did they what? Did they have a bar?
Do you have a bar of the anthem?
I don't have it. Well, it's probably Deutschland, or something along those lines. And at the time, straight arm salutes were compulsory for the German team, so it probably wasn't unusual. But nonetheless, looking back on that, a show of support for fascism in Dalymount Park, Nazi flag with the swastika in the centre of it, fluttering alongside the tricolour. It's just crazy to think about it. The darker side of Germany's fascist government, that was floating around international media at the time. Still early days in that regime, and many weren't sure what to believe at the time until obviously everything was found after the aftermath of World War II. again, just sticking with the Irish kind of German piece, I mentioned it a few minutes ago. If you fast forward 3 years to May 1939, the start of World War II was only a few months away, and Ireland played Germany in Bremen in their last game before the war began. So this was Ireland's last game before World War II. We wouldn't play again until after the war. So Ireland faced up to a pretty formidable German team on the day. But amazingly, Ireland had been instructed as a goodwill gesture by the Irish embassy. Now, I know the Irish and the Germans have always got along pretty well, but Irish embassy officials instructed the Irish players to give the Nazi salute to their hosts, which is incredible. Jimmy Dunn, who we mentioned previously, one of our greatest pre-war players, he was a Republican and a socialist. He had no love for fascism, and he had already earned political credentials because he was interned in the Curragh during the Civil War, and he was only 15 at the time. And he told his players before the game, including a certain young Jackie Carey. Jackie Carey went on to fight in World War II.
Wow.
Said to them not to give the salute. And he used the expression, remember Ogrum, remember 1916, and apparently some very impassioned speech. The match itself, Ireland drew 1-1. So again, they still didn't beat us. You'll never beat the Irish. Paddy Bradshaw scoring the goal in the 65th minute, cancelling out the Germans' goal earlier. This guy scored. Jimmy Dunn was treated to some particularly nasty treatment. He had to go off after a bad tackle. But being the man that he is, he hobbled back on and he helped Ireland to what was an excellent draw. At the time, Jimmy Dunn had got 13 goals in 15 matches. So he was a real tough SOB. And looking back on these encounters, Ireland providing the Nazi salute 3 months out before the start of World War II. It's absolutely extraordinary. If only they had known what was cooking up in the background.
I think even from reading certain books that even Britain was they obviously didn't know the horrors that were going to come, and I think there was a general.
Yeah.
And to be honest, well, there was a bit of an anti-Semitic undertone to it, but I don't think anyone knew there was the levels of what was about to unfold.
Yeah,
but, absolutely mad.
Incredible time in our history and European history and world history in general. But not to drift too far away from the world of sports. There's a couple of more pieces just to cover. Just to switch sports for a moment. Want to talk about our athletes in the 1932 Summer Olympics in Amsterdam, and this was one of our most successful international to come for decades, because on one special day in 1932, in the space of 1 hour, Ireland won more Olympic gold medals than it would manage in the next 60 years. Sorry, the 1932 Olympics was in Los Angeles, apologies. So yeah, Ireland won more gold medals in the space of 1 hour than they would in the next 60 years, right? And let me talk to you about that for a moment. So the first of them came the 400-metre hurdles. It would be 84 years before another Irish male sprinter reached an Olympic final. That was Thomas Barr in the Rio Olympics in 2016.
Wow.
Now, the man in question was a guy called Bob Tisdale. Okay, he was educated at secondary level in Shrewsbury College, and he made his name as a sprinter in Cambridge University. He did have an English accent, and the Brits actually asked him to compete for Britain in the Olympics in that summer in 1932. However, Bob refused based on the fact that he was Irish and he was raised in Neenah in County Tipperary. He was determined to represent Ireland. Perfect. So in April 1932, Tisdale wrote to a certain General Owen O'Duffy, Kieran. We just spoke to about him a while ago.
Man.
Yes, indeed. So he was actually, Owen O'Duffy at the time was head of the National Athletic and Cycling Association, which was the precursor to the OCI, the Olympic Council of Ireland. So Owen O'Duffy was big into his sports, and Tisdale wrote to O'Duffy asking to be considered for selection as part of the Olympic team. And subsequently, O'Duffy offered him a trial run at Croke Park on the 3rd of June 1932, just before the Olympics actually began. And according to History Ireland's account, this is what happened on the day. So Tisdale ran poorly the first time out. He fell just shy of Johnny Gibson's national record. But General O'Duffy, he was quite taken by Tisdale's style, and he offered him another go. So on the 18th of June, Tisdale beat the Irish record in the 400-metre hurdle. So he got it in a time of 54.2 seconds, and he therefore qualified for the 1932 Olympics.
Wow.
What happened on the day was, despite winning both his heat and his semi-final in the Olympics, he was actually a ranked outsider in the final. he did get off to a dream start. He stretched his lead out over the first couple of bends, and then drama ensued at the last hurdle. So what happened was he had a healthy lead. The gold looked certain. However, what he did was he crashed into the top of the second last hurdle, stumbled for a few steps, but he did actually manage to hold on to his lead. He regathered himself, and eventually he just got to the front ahead of America's Glenn Harden and got around in a new world record. The world record actually didn't stand because he clipped a hurdle on the way around. So even though he won the race and he was given the gold medal, the world record didn't stand remarkably because he had clipped the second hurdle based on the rules at the time. Absolutely bonkers, but nonetheless.
Now?
Say that again?
Are the rules different now, or like will it stand now?
I believe so. I think it's just a question of who crosses the line first. I don't think it matters in terms of crashing into hurdles.
Yeah.
So I'd probably have to double check that, but my understanding is you cross the line first, you win the medal. And look, that's what not only would you win the medal, but you'd actually hit the world record as well. Happy to be called out on that if I'm wrong, but yeah, absolutely bonkers rules at the time. But it's gas. He didn't even have time to celebrate. So what happened was he had to break away from his well-wishers and he headed to the hammer throwing ring to support a certain Dr. Pat O'Callaghan. I'm sure you might have heard of this guy, lads. There wasn't many members of the Irish track team. They were roommates. Both Bob Tisdale and Pat O'Callaghan were roommates. So Pat O'Callaghan was actually super famous already. He was the Olympic champion in the Amsterdam Olympics in 1928 for the hammer throw. And he was the reigning Olympic champion. So he was in second place and he was about to have his final throw. He was having trouble with the spikes on the end of his boots. So Tisdale actually had to go over and help him foil his spikes down, make sure he was ready for his final throw. And on his final throw, Pat O'Callaghan flung the hammer 53.92 metres past the best throw of the leader, a guy called Voil Berhola. And he got the gold medal. It was the second gold medal in a row. Like, what an absolute hero. Like, imagine that was today. He'd be one of the country's biggest sporting heroes, And one thing I read about based on the research I was doing, like, the sense of national pride in these guys was huge. Taking that medal back to Ireland for him was very, very important. Recognition on the world stage was very important for a young nation like ourselves.
Yeah.
Only a decade after we had, claimed independence, taking our place amongst the nations of the world.
Yeah. Huge.
Absolutely mega. So really, really interesting stuff and massively successful time in Irish athletics. Just as well, comment on the fact that Ireland didn't actually compete in the 1936 Olympic Games in Berlin. The next set of games, an Olympic Games made famous, of course, from the USA's Jesse Owens. He won 4 gold medals across both sport and long jump events. The reason why we didn't compete is because we actually boycotted the Summer Games. So the IAAF, the governing body for athletics, they amended their constitution to define affiliated members as political entities. So in Ireland's situation, the National Athletic and Cycling Association, the NACAI, they were an all-Ireland body, and they refused to recognise the border between North and South of Ireland. Obviously, this was a fresh border. It's only been in existence 10 years. And because of that, they were subsequently suspended by the IAAF, and the Olympic Council of Ireland responded by boycotting the whole event. So an awful pity that Bob Tisdale nor Pat O'Callaghan could actually defend their Olympic titles in Berlin in 1936. Very, very disappointing. You can only imagine if that was today. I mean, we had the Tokyo Olympics not too long ago. We have the Paris Olympics now in a couple of years. Imagine Kelly Harrington wasn't given an opportunity to defend her gold. That was kind of what was online at the time.
Wow.
So yeah, really, really interesting. I'm going to wrap up now. The final comment I wanted to talk about was Ireland's progress in the 1935 nations. Just to switch to rugby union very, very quickly. The 5 Nations Championship, where we won 2 games and lost 2 games. We finished in 3rd place. Wales finished in 2nd. England finished as champions. However, as with all notable victories against the English, we have to mention the fact that we did beat England in Dublin by a score of 4-3 on the 8th of February 1930. More of a soccer result than a rugby one, but nonetheless, a win is a win, as they say. We also had a famous win over Scotland in Edinburgh in the same tournament, 22nd of February, with a score of 14-11. So look, hope that sporting segment was pretty interesting for anyone listening in. I know from researching these events, I was pretty taken aback by some of these famous results that of course formed part of the Irish sporting circle and Irish sporting life in the 1930s. So I've talked for long enough. I'm going to pass it over to Steel. Steel, you're going to talk to us about a very interesting event that took place in the 1930s. What are you going to talk about?
The Irish hospital sweepstakes.
Okay.
Really interesting.
Well, no, that was really interesting. Really, it's fascinating that, you know, how the Irish or the FEI sent over details on their players and they used that to their advantage. It's crazy how, like, and I don't sound like cliched elfler or something like that to say, oh, you know, with the internet and stuff like that, but like, but like most industries, all industries are really small. So if you're in the bar game, or if you're in the bookmakers game, or if you're in any industry, it's generally a smaller world. Like everybody knows each other. Them getting that information on our players that would have been playing in the SPL, the Scottish Premier League, or anything like that, like they would have been able to quickly get information through scouts and stuff like that. I was just, it was like, I suppose, a simpler time where, you know, Ireland, I don't know, maybe they didn't realize because maybe they were, or maybe we were a bit more, who knows why we share that information. Maybe it's because we wanted to be a bit naive as a nation.
I think that's exactly what it was. Just naivety, really. Probably thought they were safe as houses. Nobody's going to come close to knocking our great striker off his perch. But as I say, they paid the price, and probably a bit of a precursor for all the bad decisions the FAI have made in recent times as well. Yeah,
I think there is a type of naivety as starting as a new nation as we were in the 20s, where you don't know. You're probably not as wily as a nation. I think we'll kind of get into my topic. You're not as wily, and so maybe the FAI would have thought, you know, it's probably the right thing to do. We've actually never been in this situation before. It's just down to naivety, and it's kind of fascinating to kind of learn about the naivety as we were. So and
the decisions they made at the time. No, for sure.
Yeah. My turn. The Irish hospital sweepstakes. For me, this is really interesting because I was so shocked that we'd never heard about this before. That was the big shock for me. It was such a money grab for the people that set it up. It was like Christmas. They basically had a license to print money. Huge sums of money were raised, not just in Ireland, but in the United Kingdom and in the United States of America, with the huge expat population that was out there.
Yeah.
But it was so crazy that, and obviously the reason why it was set up was because the Irish hospitals, as we spoke about earlier, the Irish hospitals and everything like that. I think Kieran said that the 30s was a starving time, or it was a hungry 30s. The hungry 30s.
Yeah.
So so the hospitals of Ireland, they had they weren't up to scratch. They needed refurbishment, and the government essentially didn't have this money. You know, there was hospitals all over the country, and they didn't have this money. So there was, I suppose, a weakness within the government there, that they did just simply plainly didn't have the funds to bring the hospitals up to scratch to where they needed to be. And so with that, with the Irish state having a problem in their hands, the Public Charitable Hospitals Temporary Provisions Act was passed in the 1930s, and the sole purpose, what should have been the primary purpose, was to raise money for the hospitals of Ireland, and that was the main act, and that was passed through legislation. The organisers of this were men called Richard Duggan, Captain Spencer Freeman, and a man called Joe McGrath. Richard Duggan was a Dublin bookmaker who was involved in sweepstakes and gambling in the past. Captain Freeman was a Welsh-born engineer and a former captain in the British Army. And Joe McGrath was a Irish politician and businessman, and he was actually he was a Sinn Féin and later a Cumla Gael TD. So kind of a mismatch, a pretty big mismatch there.
Joe McGrath, he was a member of Michael Collins' squad as well. He was a member of the CID, the Criminal Investigation Department, who did some pretty... They were like at the secret police. They did some stuff in the Civil War that like we will have to go into in a whole other episode. But like this guy, he had his fingers in a lot of pies, and he's a murky kind of past. It's John McGrath, yeah.
I thought the name was familiar, all right.
Yeah, I thought he was like. Do you remember the prominent Joe figure in Michael Collins?
No, it's Joe O'Reilly.
Yeah, Joe O'Reilly. I thought it was him, and I was going to be like, I'm going to be able to talk about this, but no. Yeah, you're spot on. But yeah, like a big mismatch of people. So yeah, it was like, it's so strange that there's a lot of talk. Some people said overall that 30% went to the hospitals, and some people say as low as 10% went to the hospitals.
Pretty corrupt.
Yeah, how it worked was, it was involved with horse racing. Like it was aligned with the Grand National and other really big horse races. So it kind of worked as an accumulator. If your ticket was the winner in the Grand National or horse race, you do even better. So it was a complicated one in terms of how it was structured. It wasn't like your typical lotto like they have today. But it did so well. They basically, so in the United Kingdom and the United States, gambling was obviously outlawed at that time. And so the Irish didn't outlaw it. They basically exported, as mentioned, tickets to the United Kingdom, the United States. And it was, it was almost as if like, it was like, sure, the look of the Irish, it was like we took advantage of our kind of our, rogue like it was seen as harmless, and in a way, it wasn't causing enough of a ruckus for anyone like the CIA or anything to really crack down. It was almost like a cheeky little thing that you did. Oh, the Irish sweepstakes. Sure, it's only a ticket. Sure, it was almost like a guilty pleasure. People were buying tickets in the hope that they'd win, strike big. The prizes were huge. Some of them would be the equivalent of the Euro Millions today.
Wow.
Yeah, absolutely huge prize. Like it wasn't a Mickey Mouse thing at all. So yeah, it was absolutely bonkers.
And the fact it was set up to raise funds for Irish hospitals as well, like, and they obviously didn't get, the right amount of funds to put towards that. Obviously, there was a lot of corruption, and they were filtered through into other areas, I'm guessing. Yeah,
it was the organisers that got really, really rich.
Wow.
Now the hospitals did get, like, it was just that they raised so much money, it seems, that there was excess for just the people that organised it. But the hospitals did get money.
So I was doing a bit of looking up about this. So how they were able to do that was they basically were given a free rein by the government to basically, they can cover expenses, and everything that's left after they've covered their expenses, administration fees, wages, everything like that, that went to the hospital. So they didn't say, okay, how much are the wages going to be, or how much is this? It was like, well, you just do your thing. Whatever's left, you give to the hospital. So, like, the directors and the guys were giving themselves huge wages, like, and they ended up using the money. Like, most of them became businessmen, like Irish glass bottling company, Water for Crystal. They bought into all of these. They became kind of industrial Goliaths.
Wow.
The next, and some of their families are still involved, and also they did what every Irish rich person does, and they bought a bunch of racehorses.
Yeah, yeah. Like it's such a recent thing. Like the factory gates, or sorry, not the factory gates, but the office gates only closed in the mid-80s.
Yeah, it's because they didn't get the national lottery contract, because by that stage it had become like known that it was corrupt. But so many, basically, one of the things I came across was that they had a very smart way of going about it, where they would give donations to every single party, no matter how unlikely to get into government, so that everybody, no matter who changed, Fine Gael, Labour, whoever, they were getting money off them as well. So, and party political donations, they don't like to turn those down, especially in those days.
Unbelievable.
So that's kind of how they were given that power to do what they did,
Yeah. And then the contract was eventually awarded to the government's own body anyway. Post was awarded the national lottery contract with Mike Whelan back in the day. Spin the wheel with Mike.
Mike Murphy.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yeah, Mike Whelan. Mike Murphy. No.
Marty Whelan and Mike together.
It's a mixture too. He's a fame and fortune. There. He was the OG of the winning streak. Spin the wheel.
That's it.
Well, it was like following that, because like there was almost jealousy, and there was like ministers or members of parliament in the United Kingdom saying, what the hell are we doing? Like their laws were holding them back to say, what are we doing supporting Irish hospitals? We should be putting this money into our own hospitals. And, from that, the lotteries of the United States were born, because they're like, the Irish are making loads of money off us. So, after a while, they kind of cottoned on. And over the years, the power of the Irish Hospital sweepstakes diminished. At the start, it was a booming thing. There was it featured in movies. It got exposure and press on really high exposure movies. Let me just see if I can see some of them.
So a lot of exposure on the international stage, you could say. This was well documented, not just in Ireland, but in the US, the UK, overseas, etc.
There was mention of the Irish Hospital sweepstakes on a movie called The Winning Ticket in 1935. It's about a winning sweepstakes ticket that a baby hides, and then the drama that unfolded. But loads of other novels and other movies, such as Lucky Pigs, and then part of a plot of Lucky Partners in 1940. So it was the Irish had this exclusivity, this small little window where gambling was thought of, and it was made illegal in I suppose the biggest countries in the Western world, including Canada, the United States, and the UK. But Ireland, as being the only kind of lotto, if you like, had this kind of cultural significance through all of kind of pop culture at that time. But interesting, the main office was in Ballsbridge, and my dad, when I told my dad that I was doing my segment was on the Irish Hospital sweepstakes, his eyes lit up. He was like, "No way, Jesus! I used to go around to that building up there," because my dad was from up the road, not far in Irishtown / O'Connell Gardens, Ringsend, and he's saying he used to go up there and pal around there and kind of
way
around there. But the gates were finally closed in 1986. But the women and the men that worked there, you know, it was a great place to work. They got like all the people, when the government finally disbanded, they got really good pensions. And it was kind of like an institution. The people that worked there felt hard done by. But like eventually it was just not fit for purpose anymore. It had not outgrown its need of what it was meant to do. But like the women and the men that worked there said that your books needed to balance, or else it would come out of your own pocket. And the people that were late were left outside, and they weren't allowed in for the rest of the day because it was such a kind of high demand place to work, such a good place to work. But
when they closed the gates, though, all the workers got shafted. They all the people who worked there years, they got almost like nothing, like,
This in 1986?
Yeah, but apparently, like, so I'd have to look more into it, but I was watching something about it, and like this one guy just would not let it go, and he kept going to court, and he kept fighting to get the money because the people who owned it said, "Oh, well, we're bankrupt. The company doesn't exist anymore. We're not giving you any money." And he ended up going to court, and it was only in the very late 90s that he actually ended up getting money, and then other people were able to get it because the ruling had been, he was due X
like
amount.
A severance package almost.
Yeah, he was due X amount for whatever number of years. I think this guy had worked 30 years. He was an old man at the time. But there's interviews from where he's just like, I was not letting that go.
Well, he was owed what he was due,
And he got it. And fair play to him.
Yeah, damn right. Yeah. It's really interesting still. I think there's a lot of topics that we touched on today that are so relevant, not only in the 1930s, but now in the 2020s. Kieran, you spoke about the trade war. Yeah. Look at Brexit now. Spoke about the Eucharistic Congress, the Pope's visit to Ireland in 2018. And see, you were talking about the sweepstakes, which was originally established to raise funding for Irish hospitals. And look at the mess that the Irish health system is in at the moment. So
they could use some more money.
We certainly could. Maybe that's what they need. A new sweepstakes started.
Yeah, unbelievable. I mean, if even half the money, if even half the money had have gone to the hospitals, like, we perhaps wouldn't have been the mess that we're in at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. But look, really interesting insights today, lads. I think on the sporting front of our successes against the Netherlands and Belgium back in the 1930s can be replicated this year. We've got some big qualifiers against the likes of France and the Netherlands. I'm not very optimistic about it, but if we can repeat some of the antics of the 1930s, we'll be doing well. So let's watch this space. But
Jimmy Dunn.
Yeah, another Jimmy Dunn. You never know. Hopefully we've got that young lad off Brighton as well, Evan Ferguson. So maybe he's the next Jimmy Dunn. Hopefully. But lads, I think that's probably almost time to sign off. Any closing comments, Kieran? Steele, I really enjoyed that session today. Fascinating insights. I think the 1930s was a really interesting period in our history. I think it's only going to get more exciting and interesting with the next episode, the 1940s. So, what do you reckon?
Yeah, the 40s are going to be cool because, we're going to talk about the emergency, what life was like. But like, there was Nazis here. There was a Nazi organization here, and some of those people were in hugely influential positions in society, like a guy called Adolf Marr. He was director of the National Museum. So we have some really good stuff for the next episode. So we hope you tune in.
Yeah, I think it's I think what we're doing here is like a lot of this stuff. Like, the Irish don't like to air their dirty laundry. I think that's kind of like definitely a cultural thing. It's something that all this stuff, and a lot of certainly the Irish hospital sweepstakes would never grace an Irish history book. I think a lot of the stuff that we raise here, definitely given the Nazi salute, I had never heard of that in school, but I think history is written by the victors, I suppose, in a sense, and I think the Irish, we do have a quick way whenever we I suppose fall short, we're quick to sweep under the rug. But I suppose that's what we're doing with this podcast: the good, the bad, the ugly.
The good, the bad, and the ugly is a very good way of putting it, Theo. And we'll certainly keep those interesting stories coming. But just a big thanks to all the listeners. Please continue to like and subscribe. The more our podcast gets shared, the more exposure we get, and we'd love to keep continuing this series long into the future. Hopefully, you won't be waiting too long for episode 3. So watch this space over the next couple of weeks. And thanks a lot for your time, gentlemen. Thank you very much, Kieran, Theo. I bid you adieu.
See ya.
But one final thing, I think if people there's plenty of place to comment, especially in YouTube. If people, I suppose, as we get towards when we do all the decades, there's any topics that people would like to raise for us to discuss and go through, pop it down in the comments, or We do have to get the email address, we do have to get a website, but the comment section is usually better. So I'm sure you can get in touch with us somehow. So yeah, I'd actually be curious to hear what people want for us to investigate and talk about in terms of Irish history, however far back it may be.
Absolutely, and I think that's for future episodes for us to investigate and explore further. We could go on and on all day, but luckily enough, we've got plenty of episodes coming up. So looking forward to talking then, and have a great rest of your night, lads. And Steve, enjoy your holiday to Lanzarote tomorrow. You lucky devil, you. Good stuff, lads. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.